So it's Miss Watt on behalf of the NFSP and then Mr. Henry.
Just going to move a little this way so I can see you, Miss Watt.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr.
Although
Henry.
I think if Mr. Henry sits there, then maybe Miss Perkins can't
No,
see
Miss
me.
Perkins will.
Sorry. Thank you.
I think we were fine now.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Ms. Perkins. I ask questions on behalf of the NFSP. At paragraph 4 of your witness statement, I'm not going to turn it up, I'm just going to refer to something you say there. You say the failures by the Post Office and the Royal Mail Group prior to the separation of the two companies were considerable and devastating in their impact on the lives of many affected sub-postmasters and their families. So I just wanted to start off by asking if you would expand that to acknowledge that the failures also had a devastating impact on postmaster assistants, Crown Office employees and their families, because they were also prosecuted and are also victims.
Yes.
Would you agree that the failures throughout, and that includes the period 2011 to 2015 when you led the board, also had a considerable impact on the communities that the affected post offices and sub-postmasters served?
Yes, they must have done.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to hear.
Oh, sorry, my fault. It's because I was trying to see you.
Oh, sorry.
And I moved away from the mic. Sorry.
Thank you. And would you accept that indeed this is a continuing situation? In other words, it is the case, isn't it, that there is a devastating impact on the post offices and sub-postmasters of today from the damage done to the reputation of the post office and therefore to the value of their investment in their businesses?
I'm afraid I'm not familiar with how the post office is currently faring in that way.
Do you accept that that is caused or substantially contributed to by the failures of you and your board at material time? And just to explain, by failures, I mean the failure to notice, question and act on any material piece of information, all as discussed in your evidence these last 2 days, which might have brought a different outcome to this.
I think that I have accepted over the last 2 days that there were specific areas where I think that the board or I should have pursued things. I have, think, covered that ground. But as I have also said, there were a whole number of areas where either as a consequence of my personal actions or the board actions, things were done which led to, the fact that we set up the second site inquiry, notwithstanding the problems with that, did lead to the unravelling in the end of all of this. And there were a number of actions that we took which were very positive in this context. During the time that I was in the chair, the number of prosecutions being carried out by the Post Office dropped to 0 in 2 of the years, and I think to 1 or 2 in 1 of the years. It's a completely different picture from the picture which I inherited.
Just picking up on that, you've said several times during your evidence that certainly at the start of your tenure you lifted the rock to see what was underneath. Can I put it to you that while that may well be the case at the start, would you accept that what then happened is you put the rock back down and just became part of the corporate reputation protection, which was at the very least completely incurious?
So I wouldn't accept that, no. I don't think there's really anything that I can add substantively to what I've said on this subject.
Just finally on this part, would you accept that this scandal and your part in it has had an impact on the British taxpayers who were effectively the source of funding for the Post Office's legal fees throughout what might be described as a war of attrition in defending the indefensible?
Well, it certainly is the case. I mean, I don't know what the current state of the Post Office's finances are and to what extent it is dependent on taxpayer subsidy. All I can say is that during the period when I was in the chair, we were making real inroads on that subsidy, and the Post Office was on the path to breaking even. But clearly, what's happened has had a very, very big impact on that. But I can't elaborate on that, I'm afraid.
Well, just thinking about that financial aspect that you've mentioned, at paragraph 36 of your witness statement, you say that the government's vision for turning the Post Office around was making it sustainable by developing new streams of income, modernising it, and in the process, making it profitable instead of loss-making and therefore ready for mutualisation, if you recall that is in your witness statement. Can I ask you then, was the network transformation programme something that you were aware of, involved in?
Yes, I was aware of it.
How hands-on would you say the government, relevant departments and ministers in relation were in relation to the network transformation programme?
I think they were well aware of it. It was a central part of their policy in relation to the Post Office.
Thinking a bit more about the network transformation programme then, can you say what work was done by the Post Office along with government and relevant departments to identify and put in place new income streams which would have been required for network transformation to actually be profitable for sub-postmasters?
So you're talking here about new business for the Post Office, is that what you're talking
Yes.
about? Yes. So there were, I think, 3 big streams of income. Mails was the biggest, and there was a lot of time and energy spent on the relationship with Royal Mail and trying to put that partnership on a much better footing and to deal on the front foot with the increase in online shopping, parcel delivery and all of that, which was very, very, very difficult because the Royal Mail and the Post Office were behind the game compared to the competition. There was the financial services aspect, which was relatively small when I began in the chair, but we rebooted our relationship with the Bank of Ireland to provide a proper platform on which we could develop the financial services offer, and that was going well, and there were very ambitious plans for it, which were not realised in my time. And then the third aspect, which I suspect may be what you are getting at, was government business, where we had been told by the government of the day was a very important part of the plank in their strategy for growing the Post Office's revenue, which was a disappointing. It was a disappointment because it wasn't coming through in the way that had been expected.
So if we take the way in which the network transformation programme was effectively sold to sub-postmasters, is it not the case that in truth, certainly on the government business side, if nothing else, there really were no revenue streams and this programme was effectively falsely sold to sub-postmasters?
I don't think it was falsely sold. I think that there was genuine intent to deliver the government services plank of that, alongside the other things. It was not the only thing. But I would agree that for understandable reasons, that government business was not won by the Post Office because the Post Office was often not commercially the most attractive vehicle for delivering those services. And the government, in principle, a government could decide that it was so important to maintain a flourishing post office network that you would mandate government departments to use those outlets for the delivery of those services. I don't think that would have been legal, actually, But in principle, you could make it legal, but that was not what was on offer, and it was a personal disappointment to me that I put a huge amount of effort into trying to explain to government departments and to ministers of government departments what it was the Post Office had to offer government. But there, as so often happens, and I know because I've been inside it as well as outside it, government departments, it's very, very difficult to get government departments to collaborate on a government-wide initiative that doesn't actually individually benefit an individual department, if you see what I'm saying. So it was disappointing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You look as if you're poised, Mr. Henry.
As poised as I'll ever be, sir.
Right, okay, so I'll stay in this same position. I can see both of you, yeah.
Miss Perkins, can I just ask you, please, prosecutions, you say, were kept at arm's length from the board?
Yes.
Now, obviously, that is prosecuting people, but litigation risks, in other words, civil and criminal appeals, which could result in massive damages being awarded against the Post Office, that must have reached board level.
Yes, it did reach board level.
Yes. And so from the point of view of trying to assess risk and whether or not it could have a material impact on, to use the archaicism, the group as a whole, or post-2012, the separated Post Office, that would be something where the board would obviously work in close conjunction with the executive team and also General Counsel.
Yes.
Yes. Now, I want to just ask you, please, at paragraph 298 of your witness statement, and there's no need to get it up, but you refer to a document that was prepared by General Counsel Mr. Ojard, and the reference is WITN 007 40131. I wonder if we could have a look at that. It's paragraph 298 of your witness statement, in case you have a hard copy of your witness statement. But
unfortunately, I didn't bring my hard copy witness statement back in with me, I'm sorry. So I would like to look at that, please.
well then, I'm afraid, sir, my time is going to be...
Don't worry, we'll do it quickly, Mr. Henry. Let's have WITN 00740 on the screen.
Yes.
And page 145, paragraph 298, just so that Ms. Perkins can refresh her memory about that.
I'm very grateful. When did I start?
So I'm looking at paragraph 298, is that right?
Yes.
And can we scroll down to the rest of the paragraph then? Thank you.
And now can we go to the actual document, WITN 007 40131. And could we concentrate, please, on paragraph 2.3? The headline conclusion of the backward-looking report, which is the Altman General Review of October, 2013 is that, quotation, review of the cases that had been prosecuted over the last few years is fundamentally sound, and that no, quotation, systemic or fundamental flaws in the review process were detected. In addition, a number of relatively small procedural recommendations were made regarding matters such as document retention, etc. Now, document retention is a euphemism for shredding, the unlawful, the unauthorized destruction of documents that ought to be preserved under the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act. You tell us that your General Counsel, of his own volition, must have decided to use that disgraceful euphemism to mislead you and your fellow board members.
I don't think I've used those words. I don't remember using words in relation to this sentence.
Well, you're saying that it was kept back from you. Paragraph 298, you've just read the paragraph. I may be embroidering it, but what you're saying is that this was, and I will put words into your mouth, a disgraceful action by your General Counsel to not fully apprise you of risk, not fully apprise you of what was going on in the business.
Well, I think if you look at that last sentence, I mean, obviously it depends who you are, and it depends what else you already know. But to me, that reads like a kind of bland sentence. It could mean anything. To me, that does not mean shredding of documents relating to either past or current actions in relation to prosecutions. I'm really sorry, but I simply cannot make, that's not a connection that I think you would reasonably expect somebody coming to this to see.
That is not, and you're a very intelligent woman, that is not the thrust of my question at all. I'm not suggesting that you ought to have read that as shredding. What I am suggesting, however, and I will put it to you straight, is that this must have been curated between you, the Chief Executive, and General Counsel, that a sanitized version of the truth was perpetuated in board documents as opposed to the unvarnished truth.
That is absolutely untrue, and I find that question offensive.
I'm very sorry if you find it offensive, but the fact is, you have said that things were surprising, extraordinary, disappointing, astonishing. A whole range of epithets have dropped from your lips to apparently excuse the board's stupefying ignorance on matters of central importance. And I'm suggesting to you that that cannot be right, that you must have known.
You can suggest that to me as often as you would like, in as many different words as you would choose. It is absolutely, categorically untrue, and I am on oath, and I am a truthful person.
Now, I want to deal with the issue that Mr. Beer took you to very briefly about embedded commands. And you deny or cannot recall ever teaching Miss Venables a lesson, but she claimed that you taught her how to craft a question to subordinates with an embedded command, a skill, in other words, you ask a question in which you mandate the answer you require. And the famous example of that is it possible to access the system remotely, etc., etc. You remember, perhaps, or have read about her questions before Parliament. I want to take you now to a document, POL 003 44895. what I want to suggest to you is that the language that Mr. Oyard is using is a reflection of the reality that you wanted to see and hear. That's why euphemisms are being used in board documents. It is a reflection of what you desire, your strategy, your vision, which you set for the company. But let's go to POL 003448895. And could we scroll up, please? Mr. Beer took you to this morning. And could we go, the position is intrinsically worrying, to put it politely, etc., etc. The Neds are really concerned because of the potential costs to the business, the distraction from implementing our strategy, which is demanding enough, the reputational issues and their personal positions, a bad combination made far worse if the business does not appear to be on top of it. So the paper needs to demonstrate that the board's concerns on the latter point are unnecessary, if that is possible. I suggest to you that the "if that is possible" is a throwaway post-hyphen part of the sentence. The paper needs to demonstrate that the board's concerns on the latter point are unnecessary. This was a reflection of your style of leadership, wasn't it?
I don't accept the premise of your question, and I think, if I may say so, if you look at some of the other documents, amidst the huge quantity of documents that are available, you will see that there are examples of where I have made it absolutely clear to colleagues, to executive colleagues, that I was always ready to face bad news and would deal with it head on. What I didn't want was apparently bad news that was not properly evidenced. And that was absolutely my position, but I do not accept that I ever, either directly or indirectly, encourage people not to give the full truth.
Well, let's just change tack then and deal with that. Because I suppose a demonstration of that would have been your pushing back against the inertia demonstrated by your colleagues, and you're fighting really hard to address Mr. Arbuthnot's concerns.
Is that a question?
Yes, that would be an example of you, wanting clarity and candour, and wanting to get to the truth. So, as you professed this morning, that you fought really hard to address Mr. Arbuthnot's concerns, as he then was. Do you remember saying that?
I did try to do that, yes.
But you didn't commission an independent report at any stage, did you?
What was the second? I shouldn't ask you questions. The second site review was an independent review.
But I'm talking about a review of the ISME conclusions, with which you were aware, because you had read the ISME report, and you were, at one point in your leadership, concerned that if a proper and full independent review, contrary to Mr. Ismay's conclusions, was not undertaken, then it would look as if the Post Office was unsure of its ground. You never commissioned, did you, a full forensic digital review of the software system?
So I think we have covered this ground already. Lord Arbuthnot raised concerns with me about the sub-postmasters' positions. I offered to look at setting up an independent review. He and I then had some discussions about that, and it was important, if we were going to take this initiative, which people in the Post Office didn't want to take, some people in the post office didn't want to take, that we did this on a basis that he thought he and his colleagues would regard as a proper basis. And there was quite a lot of discussion with him about the best way of doing that. It was in the light of those discussions that we went down the route of employing second sight rather than going down the Deloitte route. We looked at that yesterday, and I spent a certain amount of time and quite a lot of energy trying to get the terms of reference of that piece of work as extensive and open as I could. Now, I have said that with the benefit of hindsight, I now think that that wasn't, in retrospect, the best way to have gone about that. And I wish that I'd had a fully populated board by then, and even though I didn't have a fully populated board by then, that I had used the other non-executives who were in position to help me think this through and to put the commissioning of whatever kind of review we decided to go for on the best possible footing, really having gone into what is it that we were trying to achieve here and what would be the best way of doing that. And if need be, if we'd come to the conclusion it would have been better to go down the route of using one of the big four, to have that conversation with Lord Arbuthnot.
Ms. Perkins, did you actually read the Deloitte report?
Well, we discussed that this morning. If you're talking about the board briefing, I talked about that with Mr. Beer this morning. I didn't, until I saw that report in the disclosures sometime earlier this year, I didn't remember seeing it.
Right. So, I mean...
That doesn't mean I didn't see it. We're talking about something that happened 10 years ago.
That may be right, but is your evidence that you cannot say whether you read it or not?
I think I would, since we've now established, and we have clearly established, that it came to me and my fellow board members, I think I would have read it.
So that I'm clear, what you're acknowledging reading is the briefing report,
Yes.
not the full document.
Sorry,
Yeah,
yes.
right.
And actually, could I just say something about that?
Yeah.
Because had I seen the full, and I don't know whether anybody here has, well, I'm sure lots of people have seen it. The full report, when I looked at it again earlier this year, has one of those colour ratings, red, amber and green, against the different items. And if you just take one look at that report, you can see that there's an awful lot of red and an awful lot of amber in there. And if I had seen that, even if I hadn't read a word of the text, it would have jumped out at me.
Could I... You've said many times that you would have turned over every stone and that you've been asked about that. But could I ask you, please, in the light of what was highly contentious second sight interim review and the lessons learned, can you explain why, in early September 2013, your Chief Executive Officer resiles from a full lessons learned review, having received advice from Andy Parsons that it would expose the Post Office to proactive duties of criminal disclosure? Were you aware of that?
We discussed this yesterday. I was not aware of it.
Yeah. And in fact, that reference, no need to take you to it, is POL 001-46243. But could I ask you, please, now to be shown POL 00381-706, the 11th of September 2013. And we can see the heading, lessons learned, terms of reference, PowerPoint for the Audit and Risk Committee, and then if we could scroll up, please, from Miss Vennells to you, 11th of September, to Alistair Marnock, but copied to you, and then could we scroll up, please? Scroll up, please. And then scroll up, please. And then we see this, do we not? From Paula Vennells to Alistair Marnock. He was, of course, dealing with insurance, wasn't he?
Alistair Marnock was the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee.
Absolutely, but he was also dealing with the notification issue to the insurers, together with Chris Day.
In his, yes, he was, yeah.
Yes. Copied to you, obviously to the company secretary as well. And then could we scroll up, please? And then this. Most of the note, so this did come to you, should be self-explanatory, although I should explain the rationale behind our proposed timings. As we discussed last week, there is a choice between proceeding with the review in the near future, while the experiences are still relatively fresh in our memory, or waiting until early 2014 when we expect Second Sight will no longer be involved in the process. Having de-risked the review by narrowing its scope and running it as a short internal exercise, on balance, I think it is more important to capture our insights sooner rather than later. We are therefore proposing to commence the process in October, not earlier, because it would be more appropriate for both sides to wait until Susan is no longer working in the building. Alice and I had a chance to discuss at our one-to-one this morning, and we are both comfortable. I would welcome any comments you have. Why was it so important for Susan Crichton to be gone?
I don't remember this, the reasoning behind the change in the scope of the lessons learned review, and I have wondered about that in recent weeks myself. I think the key point about Susan was that she had been, this is a lessons learned review about the way in which Second Sight had been appointed to run this review. It was about things such as the absence of an engagement letter, things that we've talked about to do with the timetable, the costs, the lack of proper liaison with them. And Susan had been the person who was in charge of that. Obviously, as long as she was employed in the business, it was going to be a much more sensitive issue in respect of her and her personal position than it would be once she had decided to go. But the need, in my view, to look at how that had been handled and learn lessons from it was just as great after she had gone as if she hadn't gone, because the point was that it was about improving the way the post office in its newly separated state went about doing things like that. And I was aware of the fact that this wasn't, in a lot of organisations, it's absolutely normal for people to do lessons learned reviews after something has gone wrong, or even when important things have gone right. And I didn't see that happening in the post office, and this seemed to be a good example of a way of introducing that.
No, Ms. Perkins, this is intimately connected to the advice given from Andrew Parsons and also Hugh Flemington, 3rd of September, about the risk, proactive criminal disclosure. Now, we know that Miss Crichton knew from an early stage, even before the drafting of the Clark advice, that she knew about the unsafe witness. I again want to ask you, please, why it was so important for Miss Crichton to have left the business before embarking upon this de-risked, internal, much narrower in scope, lessons learned review.
I can't add anything to what I've already said.
I see.
Can we just look at... I'm sorry, I may have missed the thread of this, Mr. Henry. It's my fault. The reference right at the beginning, most of the note should be self-explanatory. Can I just be sure what the note is that it's talking about? Is it an attachment to this email or what?
No, sir.
So it's just that expression that you were exploring?
Yes, I'm afraid I may be wrong, and I'd be very happy to be corrected.
That's fine. So the position is you were exploring whether this note referred to the document which Mr. Parsons may have been the author of, which
Yes.
makes reference to Gareth Jenkins, in effect. Whereas Ms. Perkins, as I understand it, is reading that as being a note concerned with lessons learned and something different. That's it, isn't it?
Thank you very
Fine,
much.
thank you. As long as I understand
Yes.
what's going on here.
Thank you.
Fine, right.
I mean, the position is that you're using Susan Crichton as a lightning conductor, aren't you?
No.
And it's really you and Miss Venables resolving that this contentious material should not come before the board because the material is so troubling in its implications that it would have forced the board to make proactive disclosure to convicted defendants had it seen it. Isn't that the position?
It is absolutely not the position.
So, as a strategy of managing the risk between you and Miss Venables, geld or downplay the second sight report and keep Gareth Jenkins out of the picture?
No.
I mean, what would have happened on the 16th of July if, because of course Miss Venables spoke to Miss Crichton's report, didn't she?
She did.
Yeah. So therefore she must have been apprised of the issues and discussed the matter with Miss Crichton beforehand, otherwise she couldn't be able to speak to the report.
Well, I don't think you can necessarily infer that because, as we discussed yesterday, it wasn't until the morning of the board itself that, in the light of what had happened over the non-executive director's breakfast, that I took the decision to start the discussion on that paper without Susan being in the room. And as I explained yesterday, that discussion took off in such a way that it became impossible, really, to get into a situation where we could have that discussion with Susan in the room. But Paula, as she said herself, I think, didn't know that I was going to ask to kick off that discussion without Susan, and I didn't know that we wouldn't resume a discussion on the paper without Susan being in the room because events just overtook me.
You're the chair. Events do not overtake the chair. The chair sets the scope and the agenda.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But on this occasion, and this does sometimes happen, you're in a room with a group of people and they're human beings, and sometimes things kick off, and sometimes it isn't the right thing to do to try and ram on with what you had previously thought would be what you would do. You do sometimes have to flex things, and as I said yesterday, I now regret that I didn't, after that board meeting, after what had happened, think to myself, and I regret that nobody else thought of it either, that we should have arranged a separate discussion on that paper, which Susan would have attended. But I'm not. Having said that, none of us know what would have happened had we done that, and we do not know what, if anything, more Susan would have contributed to that discussion than was in the paper.
It would have been dynamite, wouldn't it? Because not only did you have the paper, and the paper, of course, even though she knew about Gareth Jenkins, leaves that out.
Yes.
But you do have her evidence to the inquiry that she had informed your chief executive officer that there were likely to be many, many claims for damages based upon what she was aware of. So it would have been dynamite. And what I'm suggesting to you is that a cordon sanitaire, it was boxed up and never ventilated before the board for that reason.
If it was boxed up, it was not boxed up by me, and if there had been dynamite, we would have dealt with it.
Right.
That was a group of people who were very independent-minded, they were thoughtful people, they had good values. It would have been very difficult, but we would have dealt with it.
One does continue to wonder why significant advices of Mr. Altman, Queen's Counsel as he then was, did not percolate up to the board during the period July to October 2013. Can you think of any reason why those significant advices of considerable importance, in fact momentous importance, didn't percolate their way up to the board?
Mr. Beer asked me about this yesterday, and I reflected on it. I don't know why they didn't. There are all kinds of reasons why they might not have done, and I'm not in possession of the facts as to why they didn't.
Can you help us, please, though, with your contemporaneous knowledge at that time? Because, for example, the announcement of the flotation of the Royal Mail Group took place on the 10th of July 2013, did it not?
I don't remember the exact date, but around that time, yeah.
And the fact is that the Royal Mail shares were floated on the 11th of October 2013 at 330p per share. But on the 16th, when they started to trade unconditionally, they were 24 times oversubscribed. That was obviously a matter that was in your mind at the time, wasn't it?
No, not particularly. I mean, there obviously, from the emails that I've seen, there was an issue about the Royal Mail prospectus, but that was not looming large in my mind at the time. It was one of those issues that needed to be handled.
Well, funding must be very, very important for any chair, because, of course, you've got to fulfill the vision of the government. And the vision of the government was to turn around the business, eradicate losses and modernise it. And to do that, you needed government funding and support, didn't you?
Yes, but I don't see what the connection is between that and the flotation of Royal Mail.
Well, the reason why is because after the flotation, which raised nearly £2 billion, 1.98, the government announced 640 million to be invested in the post office, and that was on the 27th of November 2013. I mean, there is a connection, isn't there?
I have no idea. I really don't see that connection. The fact is that we had been... The government's policy in relation to the post office, the continuation of the subsidy until the point at which we broke even, and the investment made in the post office in order to break even, was something which was being discussed, as far as I was aware, completely separately from the Royal Mail Group flotation. I never heard anybody make that connection, and I had discussions myself with officials in the Treasury and with the Chief Secretary. Nobody ever made that connection. I think that there were two completely separate things going on there. Nobody knew at the time when the policy in relation to the modernisation of the post office was announced, whether Royal Mail would float. I mean, there had not been a very successful history of that in the past. So I may be completely wrong about this, but I personally do not see those two things as being connected in that way.
From July 2013, the green light was on, because that was the announcement by Vince Cable, the Secretary of State. And of course, that coincided with the perfect storm of Second Sight interim review, and also, although I understand your denials on the point, the emergence of Gareth Jenkins as a serious problem for the Post Office. So, I mean, you have seen surely the statement to Parliament by the Minister of State the 9th of July, which was stressing that none of the issues in the Second Sight report have any impact on the Royal Mail, which is an entirely separate business. Joe Swinson, you probably also saw the Whip's briefing, which stated that Mr Arbuthnot's support for the sub-postmasters could be distracting to the flotation.
I've been reminded of those things, but you were making a completely... What I thought, I'm sorry if I've misunderstood you, I thought you were saying that the Post Office wouldn't have got its money from the government if Royal Mail hadn't floated so successfully. That's what I was arguing with you about.
No, I'm not saying that, but it's obvious, however, that if nearly £2 billion comes into the Treasury, it makes it a lot easier for 640 million to go out to the Post Office. And these things cannot be looked in hermetically sealed boxes, as it were. But I want to come to this. If you're saying that the Post Office Limited had really absolutely nothing to do with this, then surely you must have been extremely concerned by the intervention of your CEO with the prospectus.
I've seen recently re-seen those emails, and it was, I mean, clearly I was involved in discussions with the CEO about that.
I've earned my keep on this one. I mean, did it not occur to you, I mean, from the point of view, and I don't know your experience in this field, although I know that you do coach and lecture on corporate governance, but surely the whole issue of a prospectus is that you load the prospectus with risk. You load the prospectus with risk so that nobody is misled or nobody is, as it were, induced to invest on a false basis. Yet we know for a fact that the Post Office was in the process of notifying its insurers concerning the prospects of civil litigation regarding wrongful convictions. I mean, do you not see the extraordinary contradiction there with your CEO who knows about disclosure to the insurers, and yet she's having matters removed from the RMG prospectus?
I don't know the full... I haven't got the full documentation on this issue. It is, however, clear from the email that this was an issue which had been being discussed both within the government machine and within the Post Office, that this prospectus was in draft, representations from various different organisations connected with the Royal Mail would be invited on that draft, and the Post Office had, and the officials in the business department were thinking about the way in which this was described and made some representations to the Royal Mail Group about that. The ultimate, the process of putting a prospectus together is highly regulated. Slaughter and May were in there, and in the final analysis, it was for the Royal Mail Group to decide what was in its prospectus or not within its prospectus.
The problem, however, cannot be separated from the fact that the Royal Mail Group had been historically responsible for prosecutions before separation, had it not?
Yes, it had.
Yeah. And no need to take you to it, but that was a document that you saw earlier today, and you were inquiring as to liability for the post office as well before and after the split. You remember that?
Would you mind taking me back to that, please?
Yes, certainly.
Well, does this add to the point, Mr.
It doesn't
Henry?
really add
No.
to the point. Those are my questions, sir.
Thank you very much. Now then, I know that Miss Patrick is going to ask some questions. I understand that Miss Leake wants to ask questions. And I further understand, Miss Leake, that you're going to be about 10 minutes. Is that right? That's right. Well, let's have that now, if that doesn't inconvenience Miss Patrick, and then we can have our afternoon break. Just for you to know, she'll introduce herself. Why am I speaking?
Thank you, sir. I think I said 10 to 15 minutes.
We'll see how we go.
Thank you. Ms Perkins, I ask questions on behalf of Paula Venables. I'm Samantha Leake. And I just want to ask about one issue, and I want to try and clarify with you when you first knew about the existence of bugs. I'm going to ask Mr Enright to move a little to the left so that we can see each other. Thank you. Mr Beer asked you yesterday if it caused you concern that the two exceptions or anomalies, to use the preferred language, as he said, regarding Horizon, were not passed on to you at an earlier stage. You'll remember that was before the 3rd of July. And you said you couldn't remember if you were irritated. There was a lot going on. I just want to show you a series of emails that suggest that you were told about bugs before the 3rd of July. Can we start with poll 000 98797? If we go down to the bottom, go down to page 2. Thank you. There's an email from Alwyn Lyons to Paula Venables on the 28th of June. And we'll have a look at that in a moment, but we can see if we go up a little bit that was sent to you by Paula Venables on the same day. In fact, just a couple of minutes after she was sent that email by Alwyn Lyons.
Can I look at Alwyn's email for a bit longer, please?
Yes, I'm going to take you through that.
Okay.
The first thing Alwyn says here, subject, next steps on Horizon issues, update. Paula, Rod Ismay and Leslie...
Sorry, we can't... Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Could we bring that back up on the screen and scroll down to page 2? Thank you. Paula, Rod Ismay and Leslie working the detail of the two bugs to understand them and then get them into language that is clear and can be communicated. Mark is putting in place expert external comms resource to be dedicated to this issue from Monday. And if we go down a little to the bottom bullet point, we think Second Sight will present the 4 cases, some of which will not be finished, but we are not sure yet. They will also raise the issue of the bugs, which were outside the cases, but which we disclosed to them. If we can then scroll up to the email that was forwarded to you from Ms. Venables, Alice, hi. I do hope your Friday is good. We go down to the next paragraph. You will see below Alwyn's proposed next steps. It covers all the ground at present. We may update following today's phone call with second sight in an hour, and certainly will update post Alwyn's meeting with Janet on Monday. Alwyn and I are staying close, 2 calls already today, and I'm expecting an update later this afternoon, so no need to bother you today. And if we go to the email above, which is your reply to Miss Venables, within the hour, you say, thanks for the updates. I'm glad we have the best people on this. And we looked at the rest of this yesterday about maximalisation and salmon letters angle. So it seems clear from this email that you already knew about the bugs at this point, because you don't reply, what are you talking about, what bugs, I've no idea what you're going on about here. You say thanks for the update.
I do say that, but I'm not sure what conclusion. You can't. I can't draw a definitive conclusion from that. I don't recall ever having heard about these bugs before that.
Had you received an email from Miss Venables on the 28th of June, at the point at which you knew Second Sight was about to report, setting out what she has said here about Rod, Ismay and Leslie working the detail of the 2 bugs? Surely you would have said, rather than thanks for the update, you would have said, what are you talking about? I don't know anything about bugs.
I'm really sorry. I mean, I can see absolutely why you're saying that, but I don't remember. I'm not sure what I can add to this, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps we can now go back another 6 weeks to emails that took place on the 16th of May 2013. And if we could look at poll 000 98278. Ms. Venables sent you an email on the 16th of May. Hi Alice, lovely day. Just to let you know, I haven't forgotten about Vanquis. I have an approach, which I've sent to Nick and Chris. I should get back to you shortly. Also, re James Arbuthnot, I've asked for an update on our work plan by the end of this week to make sure we're on track. Jay is away in committee business, so we're meeting post-Whitsun recess. One other issue arose overnight, which I may need to brief you on over the next couple of days, so we'll try to get a phone slot. If we scroll up, you send an email back. Fine, thanks. I'm now unexpectedly free this afternoon, so if someone lets me know when you're able to talk, I'll try and fit around that. Can we then go to poll 000 29587? By this point, a call has been arranged between you and Miss Venables for the afternoon. And Alwyn Lyons sends to Paula speaking notes for your call with Alice this afternoon. Can you just scroll up a little? Scroll down. Paula, here are my speaking notes for your call with Alice this afternoon. I have a call with James on the 23rd of May, next Thursday at 10:30, when we'll discuss how he wants the investigation to continue. And just scroll up a bit more, please. Alwyn will, and we go down to the 6th bullet point. I'm so sorry, the 2nd bullet point. Some instances are coming to light where there is evidence that there are bugs in Horizon, which I'm being told is normal in any large computer system, but I'm still being assured that the system's integrity is not in doubt. Leslie is meeting Fujitsu tomorrow morning to go through the technical assurance that the sub-postmaster's trading statement cannot be changed without their knowledge. Alwyn is meeting them on Monday to look at with a layman's eyes and understand what it might have looked like for a sub-postmaster using the system. The good news is that where we have found bugs since HNGX New Horizon, they have been detected and put right with no loss for the sub-postmaster, and Fujitsu now monitor the suspense account for any such problems. Alwyn will specifically ask on Monday if anything could be happening we do not know about, e.g. too small to register at the office and old Horizon bugs. This is not good, Alice, but from what we have seen so far, our response to bugs has been effective. I've asked for some time in our diaries next week to talk through our approach, would welcome your counsel before the James meeting. Do you recall a conversation that afternoon in which you were told about those bugs?
No, I don't.
So when you received the email on the 28th of June, giving you an update about what was going on with bugs, are you saying that you hadn't been told about that beforehand, or you simply can't remember?
I can't remember, I'm really sorry. I've only, some of this documentation has only came to me at lunchtime today. So, you know, I have had a look at it, but I'm afraid I have absolutely no recall.
Okay, thank you. Sir, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Ms. Leake. So we'll take our afternoon break now and resume at 3:30 when Ms. Patrick will ask her questions. And if they are so advised, your legal representatives may wish to ask a few questions of you, but that's up to them, not me. And then that will be it, all right?
Thank you very much.
So 3:30. I should move this way now.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Miss Perkins. My name is Angela Patrick, and I ask questions on behalf of 86 sub-postmasters who were convicted by the Post Office and have since had their convictions overturned, including Mrs Hamilton, who I'm sure you can see is sitting to my left.
I do see.
And we want to cover 3 topics.
Yeah.
First, we're going to look at the Royal Mail Group prospectus, which you've just covered briefly with Mr Henry.
Yeah.
Second, Mr Beers talked to you a little about Mr Davies and publicity around Horizon, and I want to come back to one example of the Post Office's approach to SPMs in the media, sub-postmasters in the media. And finally, I want to look again at one of the first documents Mr Beer took you to, and I'm going to call it the Zetter Note. The Zetter Notes, if you remember from yesterday morning.
You'll have to remind me.
I will
I'm
refresh
sorry.
your memory
Yeah,
when we
thank
get
you.
that far.
Thank you.
If we can start with the Royal Mail Group prospectus, and Mr Henry's raised the flotation. You've talked about it not really being an issue that was looming large, but I want to look at, you've mentioned a few emails.
Mm-hmm.
If we could look at a few of those just to see where you were coming in.
Yeah.
And if we can start with Paul 00 372265, please. And I want to start about halfway down page 1, if we could.
So can you just give me the context of this?
I will.
please?
This is an email sent on the 16th of August 2013. And don't worry, I was only waiting for it to be on screen so
Okay,
that we could look at
fine.
it together.
Okay, great.
I won't leave you hanging as to what we're looking at. There's an email here, you can see at the top. It's Paula Venos to you on the 16th of August. And if you see, she's messaging at the top looking for a time when you can have a call. I don't want to look at the detail, but she wants to catch you up on some issues. And if you can see, there are a list of 4. And if we go to the 4th bullet point, if somebody could expand that, I'd be grateful. It says RM prospectus. Can you see that one?
Yep.
The language in the risks section, which refers to the post office, is very negative. We're on the case. It is being handled through external lawyers, and I've asked for a revised draft by Monday. I'm not suggesting we flag this to the board yet, but you need to be in the picture. Susan's picked this up and insisted inaccuracies are removed and the tone improved. However, this is in the risk section. My guess is we may still be uncomfortable with our final draft. And so I've already asked Susan to flag to Will that we may want to escalate it to HMG. We will need to brief the board properly at some stage, but probably best when we have something to send out. Now, I only have a few questions about it.
Okay.
You were, it appears, being briefed on this as an issue as early as mid-August in 2013.
It does look like that, yes.
And the issue you were being told was arising in the risks section of the prospectus.
Yes.
And it was very negative about the post office. And Susan, I presume that might be Miss Crichton?
I can't think. Well, it wouldn't have been Susan Barton. So.
It wouldn't have been Susan Barton. Miss Crichton was to flag that it might need to go to HMG, Her Majesty's Government, and Miss Venos thought you might need to brief the board properly at some stage. But she was saying you, aside from whether the board needed to be briefed, she was giving you this information now, wasn't she?
She was.
Right. Can we look at the second document, a second email? And it's Paul 00419640. And this is an email which moves us on a little. And I'll wait for it to come up. And I want to start at the bottom of page 1, where you'll see there's an email from you.
Yes.
And we're now a little while on, a few weeks on, maybe three weeks on, 9th of September 2013.
Yeah.
And you're sort of responding, thank you for your previous emails. And we don't need to spend much time on your response. I just want to note what you say to start with. I appreciate no surprises, even if the news is unwelcome. So that was the first message you were giving to Miss Venos that day.
Yeah.
Can we scroll up? The rest I don't think we need to look at in detail. I want to look at Miss Venos' reply above, and it's the last paragraph of Miss Venos' reply. On the prospectus, now Mark is back, I have him, Martin and Hugh meeting this PM, and they will speak to Biz today. Would that be Mark Davies, Martin Edwards and Hugh Flemington?
It could have been. I mean, I don't know, but that sounds, that sounds perfectly reasonable suggestion.
So they were going to speak to Biz. I'm still not happy with the content. Although it may be legally accurate, it is not helpful reputationally. And then she goes on to say, ironically, Post Office has enough branches signed up to cover the distribution of the prospectus, and she's going to keep you posted. And I only have a few questions about this one. She's telling you, even if the content was legally accurate, her concern was primarily reputational risk, wasn't it?
Yes.
Whose, logically, would it follow she was concerned about the reputation of the Post Office?
I don't know what she had in mind, but it's a reasonable interpretation that she was thinking about the post office, yes.
Could it be the reputation of Royal Mail Group,
It could be.
the government?
No,
Anyway,
no. I mean,
you don't know. You're just speculating. Logically, it could be the post office.
yes, it could be.
If we could scroll up a little. I know. I'm sorry, Mr. Henry was trying to attract my attention, sir, I'm afraid. If we can scroll up a little, we see the next section.
And what do you mean by the next section?
Oh, sorry, I apologise. Can you see that, no, I didn't mean that, where you reply, at the bottom of the part you can see on screen there, Miss Perkins, no, I didn't mean that. Can you see?
I didn't mean what, sorry.
I'm just trying to attract your attention. It's now highlighted in yellow. And you reply at 2:11. No, I didn't mean that. We don't need to look at the first line. It's the second line.
Okay.
On the content of the prospectus, Will was absolutely clear that this should be and would be properly sorted. You only need to read the Hansard of last week's parliamentary debate to see how important that will be politically. So I'm sure Joe S. would swing into action on this if it were necessary. So Will had given you some assurances. Was that Will Gibson at Sheck's?
I should imagine so. I don't know.
Okay, and Joe S., is that likely to be Joe Swinson?
I would think so, yes.
Thank you. And we don't see any challenge by you in this message of Mrs. Vennell's view of the issue being reputational and not one of legal or technical accuracy, do we?
No.
No.
No, you don't.
Your focus was on how important it was going to be politically. Getting this sorted for Post Office was politically important, wasn't it?
Well, I think we've had this discussion a great deal over the last 2 days, haven't we? And the inference is often being made.
Ms. Perkins, can I stop you? I don't want to draw any inference. I just want you to reflect on what's in the email.
Okay.
That was what was being exchanged contemporaneously. Here, you were sending a message here that the importance was political, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
And it was so important, you were sure you could rely on the minister to step in.
Yes, well, that I thought she would, yes.
Indeed. Now, can we look at the third document? It is Paul 20381-730. Thank you. And I want to start at the bottom of page 1 again. If we can scroll to the very bottom, we can see there's an email that's from you. Can you see that, Miss Perkins?
Yes.
And we're on Monday, the 16th of September now, and you're writing to Georgia Preston, who I can see at the top there, that's your PA. Is that right?
Yes.
And subject Mark Russell. We've heard that name earlier. Was he the head of Sheck's?
He was.
Great. And you told Mr. Beard you'd have regular meetings with him. We'll see in the message here, you're talking, I think my main question is, what should my objective be in talking to him about strategy and funding? I need to know the position, so he's aware of the board and the package, what might be needed to get the Fed on side. And you go on talking about strategy and funding and a number of other matters until the second line from the bottom. And you say, and also, sorry, third line from the bottom, also the update on where we are with second site, etc. And the latest on the RM prospectus. So basically, all the current hot topics. And you say, I'd like to talk to Paula about this in my one-on-one with her. This is you, I think, talking about preparing for a meeting with Mr. Russell. Is that fair?
It does look like that, yes.
Yeah, and a number of topics. And the Royal Mail prospectus was a hot topic by this point, wasn't it?
That would be the inference of this, yes.
if we can look at the fourth document, please. It's UKGI 402057, please. And this is the 18th of September, and it's not necessarily a message you would have seen. And it's you can see it's a series of exchanges between Will Gibson and Tim McInnes. I would like to look very briefly. It's a long message. I don't want to look at a lot of it. I just want to see where you're mentioned. Can we go to halfway through page 2, please? And you can see there's a message from Mr. Gibson. We've had him mentioned this morning. And I think we've had Tim McInnes mentioned this morning also. But you see there, he says, just to echo Tim's point, re-sign off. I have just come from a meeting with Paul's CEO where she was voicing her concerns that not all Paul's comments had been picked up and they'd definitely not been signed off. Their wording, and that said they'll ensure there's chapter and verse from Paul on what's outstanding. And if we can scroll up from there to the bottom of page 1, I'd be very grateful. And we can see there, there's a message from Mr. McInnes back to Mr. Gibson. Yes, and I just had Martin on the phone. Alice is properly up for a fight. I've bought some time, but let's see what Emma can set up. Now, if we scroll up again, Mr. Gibson replies. And you can see what he says. Alice is coming in to see Mark tomorrow. That would fit with the timing of your preparation for a meeting. And above, we can see the message continues. Were you up for a fight, Mrs. Perkins?
I simply don't remember all of this. And those are not my words. I mean, what you're getting there is you're getting Tim McInnes reporting to Will Gibson something that somebody else has said to him.
Entirely. And I wouldn't expect you, I said at the outset, you hadn't seen this message. But that was, it appears, how your position was being presented by Martin, presume Martin Edwards, in advance of your meeting with Mark Russell. Is that fair?
It would appear as though that is how it's been described, but we don't know what Martin said to Tim McInnes, and we don't know. I mean, you know, there's lots we don't know.
He may come to give evidence. We may be able to ask him about that. And if we scroll up a little way further, you can see there on the screen. Actually, I can see it now. Don't stop. Please stop scrolling. It's now moved to the bottom. The reply there, not unhelpful. I just don't want things to go nuclear until that's all we have remaining. Does that fit with your recollection of this discussion at the time? Was this discussion on the verge of nuclear status for the relationship between Royal Mail Group and the Post Office?
Absolutely not. No.
Okay.
I'm sure that it wasn't. However, that is just my reaction based on what I know about how I would be thinking about something like this. But just to be completely clear, until I saw these documents either earlier today or yesterday, I can't even remember when I first started seeing this email chain, I simply hadn't remembered anything about this issue at all.
Okay. Well, if we can look at the last document, this is the last one I think I need to take you to. And it may refresh your memory a little bit about what was being discussed. It's Paul 2038147. And it takes us forward to the 20th of September. And it's not, again, a message you would have seen. I just want to see if it will help your memory. It's a message you can see there from Mr. Edwards to Paula Venables, copied to Mr. Davies. And again, it says prospectus update. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to bring it up on my screen because that one is a little bit far away for me to read. I apologise. You have to bear with me for a moment. And he's updating Miss Reynolds. I won't read it all, but I'm going to read the first bullet point a little. Focusing on the first bullet point, latest draft attached. Overall, it is improved and addresses some of our concerns, although the risks section is still intrinsically negative in tone. The Shex Paul team have pushed hard for additional language to be inserted on the strength of the relationship to contextualise these risks, but I have received firm pushback that this wouldn't be appropriate for this element of the document. Such language is, however, covered elsewhere in the document. My sense is we're going to have to accept this position and focus now on making the positive story is brought out in the wider comms materials, the marketing materials for the transactions, our own lines to take and Minister's statements. Now, focusing on that bullet, the first bullet, it seems there were concerns about language in the risk section, but Paul, Mr Edwards was saying, could just accept the position and then deal with it in comms. Is that a fair summary?
I think so, yes.
And so it would go on Mr Davies' desk, possibly. He was copied in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we scroll down, can we skip to bullet 3? It seems except one issue is outstanding by this point. And he writes in the third bullet, I think the one remaining issue we might want to seek to change now is the sentence on the SS review, I'm going to say second site review, copied below. Ideally, this would just be deleted because it's misleading in the context of a section on IT risks, as we discussed before. In July, this is the sentence he's talking about, the part. In July 2013, an interim report was published into alleged problems with Post Office's Horizon computer system, which is used to record transactions in its branch network. The report confirmed that no system-wide problems had been found in relation to the Horizon software, but suggests that Post Office should examine its support and training processes for sub-postmasters. Now, I read that in full just to see if it helps with your memory. But in summary, Mr Edwards was saying the Post Office wanted that deleted entirely, ideally. Is that right?
I think he's saying it would be deleted in the context of a section on IT risks. That's what he seems to be saying.
But ideally, this would be deleted. And we could skim the rest, but we can get to the very bottom in the last 4 bullet points. I think we can see he says, and we've had this all before the inquiry has had this issue raised with Ms Reynolds. Last one, Shex had been working on it, and he says, we've reached the end of the road in terms of Shex's ability to influence this, and he references that the prospectus is essentially going in on the Monday, so it's imminent. And he says Alwyn could pick it up, but they were much more likely to listen to, and this is a message to Paula, likely to listen to you. Was this him at this point when the prospectus was imminent? Do you recall it being bumped up to Mrs Reynolds to deal with?
I don't, I'm sorry.
Okay. Now, we know in the inquiry's heard that Mrs Reynolds later reports to you by email that she thought she'd earned her keep on this, and she puts it in her review for the key achievements for the year. By this point, we know that when she reports to you, it's going to be removed. You'd been involved, Shex had been involved, you'd mooted something going up to the Minister. Mrs Reynolds, she did earn her keep on this one, didn't she?
Well, it looks as though she got agreement to what it was that she was proposing. Those are her words, they're not my words.
Okay. No problem. We shall move on to the next topic then, Ms Perkins. And I think these can be shorter. The next topic I wanted to look at was Horizon publicity. Now, Mr Beer covered Mr Davies' appearance on the Today programme very briefly with you this morning. I remember you saying at home you listen to Radio 4 today every morning. And we talked about the appearance he made in December 2014. Now, Mrs. Hamilton is sitting next to me. She also appeared on that programme that day, and she listened live as Mr. Davies pointed to sub-postmasters experiencing lifestyle issues. Now, when Mrs. Reynolds gave evidence, Mr. Maloney asked her about a late evening message she sent later that month, on the 17th of December, having watched an episode of The One Show.
I vaguely.
Do you recall?
Vaguely, only vaguely.
I might be able to refresh your memory. Can we look at Paul 001503552? And if we could start, it's a multiple page document, if we could start at page 3, we can find the email from the 17th of December. And you see there's a message from Miss Reynolds, and it goes to Mark Davies, to Belinda Crowe, Gavin Lambert, Patrick Bork, and it's CC'd to you. And it's sent in the late evening at around 10:15. And the inquiry is very familiar with this. I'm not going to read much more than I need to, but I think it is worth repeating. She writes, "Hi all, I managed to catch the show, One Show on iPlayer. Not denying the fact that it is unhelpful and inaccurate, especially the focus on Horizon, but see below thoughts on that. Mark has achieved a balance of reporting beyond anything I could have hoped for. The statement stamped across the screen with the post office sign as a backdrop were really powerful. They emphasised everything we've done and came across as fact. Very good. The rest was hype and human interest. Not easy for me to be objective, but I was more bored than outraged. The MP quoted, who was full of bluster and inaccurate. Joe Hamilton lacked passion and admitted false accounting on TV. James Arbuthnot was nowhere to be seen, and the bulletin was too long. What I thought was helpful was that it presented Horizon as the problem, which is exactly what Second Sight say they haven't found, and so easier for us to refute. There was nothing about intimidation, poor coaching, and the message about not knowing how to use the system. In my eyes, it made the sub-postmasters look inadequate." Now, we can pause there and we can come back to the language. Mr. Maloney asked Mrs. Reynolds if she might have regretted that message the morning after she'd sent it and copied it to you. I'd like to look at the day after. If we could scroll up through this message slowly, I'd be grateful. And we can see the next morning, Belinda Crowe circulates it to Angela van den Bogard. If we can scroll up. What happens is Mrs. van den Bogard engages with a request from Mrs. Reynolds about one of the sub-postmasters who appeared in the programme, not Mrs. Hamilton. And I'm not suggesting we look at that detail. I just want to see where it goes next. Can we scroll up a little way? We see Mrs. Reynolds replies. I just want to stop there one moment. I don't want to look at the detail, but I just want to raise a point which Mrs. Reynolds uses about the languages she uses here. This isn't copied to you at this moment, but it is later. At the very last paragraph of this, she says Chris, and it's copied to Chris Ojard. If you didn't see The One Show, please can you watch the clip? Again, I expect we're best to do nothing at this stage, but references the sub-postmaster's name. It's completely out of order, inaccurate at best, lying at worst. And this is the part I want to look at. Whether it's right or it's wrong, she says, and has willfully collaborated in I presume that's bringing us into disrepute. Now, briefly, and we don't have to look at the detail, is this just another example of the belligerent language we'd seen being used in the business when talking about campaigning SPMs? Willfully collaborated in bringing us into disrepute. What do you think of that language?
Well, looking at this now, obviously it looks absolutely dreadful.
And this is language being used by Mrs. Venables herself, isn't it?
Yes, in this email it is, yes.
You aren't copied in on this email, but if we can scroll up, we see Thursday the 18th of December, 7:24, very early in the morning after the original message. Hi Alice, if you get the chance, probably worth a view, the one show from both your directorships actually. The BBC produced a very viewable 5-minute bulletin. Pity it's so wrong. The note below refers, and she says there's some personal messages. It's very close to Christmas, and she's talking about cards getting off. Now, she writes to you again, directly copying the whole of that thread, including her message from the last night. She sent you her one show response on twice. Now, if we can turn back to that original message on page 3, just so we have it in front of us. Did you take issue with what Mrs. Venables was saying?
I'm afraid, I'm really sorry, but I don't think I've seen this before. I may have done, but I simply do not remember this.
We've seen the first, and I've read it out. She was congratulating Mark Davies for a job well done. This was a win she wanted you to see, wasn't it?
It would look like it, yes. It would look like it.
She was saying Mrs. Hamilton lacked passion, sub-postmasters looked inadequate.
Well,
Did this simply reflect the attitude that was being adopted by the Post Office leadership team at that time in late 2014 to the campaigning SPMs, the sub-postmasters?
I can't add anything to this, I'm afraid. I mean, it looks, as I've just said, it looks absolutely dreadful given what we know now. And I am, I'm very...
I'm going to stop you there, Miss Perkins.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not dreadful according to what we know now. Looking back, she sent it to you twice.
She sent it to me twice?
Yeah. She sends it to you on the 17th of December when she copies you in. She sends it to you the next morning with the rest of the thread. Did you have any issue with the language she was using at the time? Can you remember taking it up with her? Oh, Paula, what have you done? Can you remember?
I'm terribly sorry. I simply cannot remember any of this. I do remember the Today programme because I remember hearing it, but
Okay.
I don't remember this.
Is there any written response?
We can't. I haven't
No,
found one,
fine.
sir.
Okay, fine.
Looking at Mrs. Venables' language, she says she's more bored than outraged. Had the business become bored by the sub-postmasters campaign by this point?
That's not how I would describe how I thought about it.
Did the business simply just want to move on and get on with the job of making the post office sustainable for the future?
Well, the business did want to make the post office sustainable for the future, but as far as I was concerned, and as far as I'm aware, my board colleagues were concerned, we weren't wanting to do anything different from what we'd wanted to do all along, which was to handle the issues properly.
Handle the issues properly, but your CEO more bored than outraged. We can move on. Can we look at the final topic? And that is the Zeta note. And I do want to help your memory. Mr. Beer started with this very early on yesterday, and you said when you were looking at it, he was looking at handwritten notes, if you remember.
Oh, yes.
And you can be sure, of course, but you said that in meetings, sometimes you'd scribble on the papers, and sometimes you'd go back and add a note afterwards to keep your memory fresh.
Yeah.
And Mr. Beer took you to a lot of notes. And I just want to look at one scribbled note that he didn't look at. And if we look at the document, it's Paul 00413-669. And that should bring us up with the diary page, if you remember, which referred to the bistro at the Zeta. And if you remember, the date was the 19th of March. This is yesterday morning, Mr. Beer brought this up. It's between your first meeting with James Arbuthnot, I think it was the 13th of March, and you were preparing for a meeting on the 28th of March, which Paula couldn't attend. Mrs. Venables wouldn't be able to go to. And there was a pack of papers disclosed to the inquiry behind this diary entry. I'd like to scroll to if we don't need to scroll, but if we could go to page 5 of the pack. Mr. Beer skimmed through this yesterday to get to the main note. But this is I think it was described as a briefing prepared by Mr. Arbuthnot's office, as he was then, now Lord Arbuthnot. Mm-hmm. And we see skim through, there's notes on the side, we can see some handwritten notes there. If we scroll up, skim through 6. I don't want to go all the way to page 9, which is where Mr. Beer took you yesterday. I want to go to page 7 in the little pack. It may be page 8, but I think it's page 7. There's a page, if we keep scrolling up, yeah, you can see faults of the horizon there. Somebody's annotated it on the right with a mark next to it. If we scroll up a little bit further, keep going, please. Stop. Now, we see a little scribbled note there, and I want to look at it from the bottom up. It says I think there's a helpline. It says there is a helpline available. It's underlining is there is a helpline available. We've talked, the inquiry's heard a lot about the helpline. I don't need to go to that. The next one up, much cash around. Now, you told Mr. Beer yesterday you'd been taken aback by the fact that there was so much cash in the business.
This is not my handwriting.
It's not your handwriting. Is it possibly a note that was scribbled at some point during the meeting?
It's not my handwriting.
Not your handwriting. Can I just explore the top message there? Reputation key?
It's not my handwriting.
Can you help with whose handwriting it might be?
I'm sorry, I don't know whose handwriting that was. All I can tell you is that it's not mine.
It's in a pack of notes behind the same diary entry and with the same notes that you were taking. And you can't assist us on who took it?
Well, obviously it could be Paula's writing. All I can tell you is that it is not my writing.
Okay. Was this a message you were being given from within the business by Mrs. Venables or somebody else that reputation was key, even at this time in 2012?
I don't remember this coming up at this meeting. I mean, it is a responsibility of any board to protect the reputation of the organisation. It's one of the many responsibility a board has. And I think we have talked a lot in the last 2 days about why I thought and other people thought it was important to protect the reputation of the post office business on the basis that I believed that the Horizon system was sound and that we didn't, and the prosecutions had been properly conducted.
Yes, we've looked at reputation in the context of the RMG prospectus. We've looked at fighting. We've talked about fighting for the reputation of the post office this morning. This is 2012, before your bulk of engagement with James Arbuthnot. I suggest reputation really was the key question for the business, not just as a responsibility. It was a goal from the start and throughout, wasn't it, Mrs. Perkins?
Not mine. I've made absolutely clear what my motivation was in relation to Lord Arbuthnot's concerns. Okay. I wanted to set up an independent review to get to the bottom of it, and I have made it clear in a number of contemporaneous documents that I wasn't afraid of getting bad news if bad news were to come.
Can we stop and pause there for a minute? Others have talked to you about the future of the post office, all the work that was going on, the network transformation. The shareholder, the government's real goals for the business was to get to profitability and a mutualised post office that could stand on its own feet with less dependence on government subsidy, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
Yeah. Would that be made more difficult if the post office was no longer the nation's most trusted brand, but instead faced public investigation and opprobrium for the wrongful prosecution of hundreds of its own people?
Of course it would, but that... I'm sorry, I am repeating myself, but this is really, really important.
Ms Perkins, I don't want you to repeat yourself.
I think I've got this point.
Okay.
I just want to ask one last question, sir. Was this prospect that the post office was responsible for wrongfully criminalising people like Mrs Hamilton something that during your time in the chair the business simply could not or would not contemplate?
Not as far as I was concerned, and as far as I can possibly be aware, that was not the position of my fellow non-executive board directors.
Looking back, do you think the board might or ought to have been less bored by the sub-postmasters and more outraged by the possibility of miscarriages of justice that had ruined hundreds of its own people?
The board was not bored of this issue, and I have said on a number of occasions over the last 2 days that I think that there were instances where the board should have acted differently.
Thank you, Ms Perkins. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
I've spoken to Miss Berridge, who represents Miss Perkins, and she said as long as I deal with one issue, which will take about 3 minutes, she's content not to ask questions. And
Fine.
it's a very small point of detail. I don't think it will stop the world turning, but it will. It's an important point of detail, perhaps. Can we look, please, at the last 3 minutes of questions, Ms Perkins?
Yes.
At poll 302-9587. You remember you were shown this email about half an hour ago, by Miss Leake.
Yeah.
And when she was introducing it to you, she said, and the draft transcript reference is page 148, line 12, quote, Allwyn Lyons sends to Paula speaking notes for your call with Alice this afternoon. In fact, if we look at the email, we can see that on the face of the email, it's not sent to Paula Venables. It's sent by Allwyn Lyons to Allwyn Lyons. Can you see that?
Yes, I do see that.
The first sentence reads, Paula, here are my speaking notes for your call with Alice this afternoon. So it could be, I suppose, that this is a draft that didn't get sent.
Okay.
It could be a way of sending something to yourself for printing off and handing over. But on the face of the document, it wasn't sent to Paula Venables. Can you see that as a speaking note for her conversation with you?
Yes.
We haven't got any other evidence that this email was sent to Paula Venables as a speaking note prior to the conference call that had been teed up with you.
I see.
I should say, if we just look lastly at WITN 0102 0100, this is Ms. Venables' witness statement,
Right.
page 168. Paragraph 360. She says at 13:05, that's the time of the email. Yeah.
Right.
At 13:05 on the 16th of May, Allwyn sent me a speaking note to use on a call with Alice that afternoon. And then she gives you the reference,
Okay.
or gives us the reference to the document we just looked at. So
I
it looks
see.
like the mistake was made there as well.
I see.
That this was a note sent to Alice at sent to Paula Venables at 1:05 p.m.
But in fact, it was Alwyn sending it
Alwyn sent it to herself.
Yes, I understand. Thank you. That's
Thank you.
really helpful. I'm sorry, I have got a bit... I think I'm suffering from brain fog.
So they're the only questions I ask.
Thank you. So that brings an end to the questioning of you, Ms. Perkins. I'm very grateful to you for having provided a very detailed witness statement and for giving evidence over the last 2 days.
Thank you very much.
Right. So we will adjourn now until Tuesday at 9:45,
That's right.
when we will resume.
Thank you very much, sir.